Hey, it's me again. Um, I noticed that the last couple videos that I uploaded, um, not that I, not that it really matters, but the last couple of videos I uploaded haven't gotten quite the amount of views that I would like them to have. Like, I would like people to watch them and learn from them and, take something away from them. But I find myself also struggling with the urge to edit myself constantly. So this is kind of a disclaimer video as well. Um, let's see. I don't really know that much about like trauma theory. Like I don't know, I know that there's various ways of responding to trauma when it happens. You have people that develop post-traumatic stress, which I won't call a disorder because um, I think post-traumatic stress, depending on the level of trauma that the person experiences, I would see post-traumatic stress as a normal human response to trauma. So, um, so I don't necessarily see it as a disorder or a disease. Um, but like I said, I know next to nothing about trauma theory. But I do know some things about my own experience that lead me to believe that my delusions and my hearing voices, etc., like all of that, to me, looking back from a point where, where I can see things clearly now, I would see all of those things as a response to trauma. And you were like, well, what did you go through that was so horrible? What did you go through that was so bad? Well, what ended up happening during that time is that I ended up doing all this work on the inside of myself that I just wasn't ready for. And so as a response to that, like overworking of my psyche, plus at the time I was like going 5 days without sleep, and I'm sitting here and I'm doing all this emotional work. I think my brain was just taxed to the point where it couldn't deal anymore. It couldn't deal with any more emotional stuff. It couldn't deal with any more any more trauma. And there's the trauma of not sleeping, which, let me tell you something. Sleep is so important. Sleep is like one of the most important functions of the human brain. And if you don't believe me, then let me posit this question to you. Why do you spend a third of your life sleeping? Um, so basically what happened to me was a result of dealing with a lot of emotional upset all at one time, plus dealing with a lack of sleep, um, and just dealing with those two stressors pushed me over the edge into this state of mind that I was in, where I was experiencing things that weren't part of normal reality. I'll just put it that way. So nowadays, I know my first warning sign to me when I'm going into a manic state or a paranoid state, my first warning sign is usually 1 or 2 or 3 days without sleep. And when it gets to that point, I know to seek help. Because once it becomes 4, 5, 6, 7 days without sleep, that's when the real problems start to happen. So let me tell you, sleep is in a manner of in the manner of healing. Sleep is probably the number one healing modality that I use myself to deal with my illness, to heal. And let me tell you, it took probably about a year or two of normalized sleep before I finally caught up on all the sleep that I had lost during my manic state. And I don't think my brain is healed yet from from that lack of sleep. I don't I don't see that as something that I'll heal from, um, especially not with all the chemicals running around in my brain now. I just don't see that as something that can be healed at the drop of a hat. So, sleep is probably the number one thing, I would say. But like I said, let me get back to this idea of trauma. I think everybody that has had some kind of trauma in their life has developed some kind of coping mechanism to deal with it. It's either turning in and shutting down, which is one coping mechanism. Dissociation is a more extreme version of that coping mechanism. And I've known some people who basically develop various personalities separate from their main personality, where when trauma happens, their other personalities come out and help them deal with that. And that's another coping mechanism as far as I'm concerned. I don't see coping, I don't see finding a way to cope as something that should be pathologized. And that's basically where I come from with that. Like, I don't understand why coping mechanisms like dissociative identity disorder, dissociation, post-traumatic stress, I don't understand why any of that all needs to be pathologized. Because to me, all of that is a response to trauma, and until you touch the roots and get the roots of that trauma out of the brain-body system, um, starting probably from the spirit side of things, until you deal with that, you're not going to have any sort of healing. You're just going to be covering up the symptoms of what you see as a disease. So, I don't agree with the mental illness model at all, and like I said, I actually posted something on my MySpace page where I said, I believe that illness starts in the spirit world and it flows down through the mental, emotional brain, and then when it gets to the point where there's nothing else that can happen but for it to manifest physically, that physical manifestation is what they would call a chemical imbalance sometimes. And the physical manifestation is the only part of the illness, the only part of the trauma that they're actually treating in a lot of instances. And that to me is an incomplete, unholistic approach. And it's an approach that doesn't always work. I mean, there's a lot of people that have mental health concerns that are not completely addressed by medication, And by the time you get them medicated enough so that they're not experiencing symptoms anymore, they're so medicated that they can't function. And that to me is a failure of the system. I mean, thank God I was lucky enough to find treatment that worked for me straight away. Um, but I also saw other people in the hospital that were being treated with more holistic methods, such as fish oil, which they were using for some patients. I don't know why they don't just have a big old supply of fish oil and use it on everybody. Because fish oil not only helps you with mental illnesses, it also helps your cardiovascular system. It functions in your body to do a whole bunch of different things for you. And it's better treatment, I would say, than just trying to medicate everything with drugs. Because it's more naturalistic, it's more holistic. It's something that comes from the earth. It's something that used to be, at least as far as I'm concerned, it used to be the main staple of a lot of people's diets. You know, fish. A lot of people, coastal area people, island people, and even my people, like the main staple in our diet, when we weren't, when we weren't running around trying to catch that deer, we were down by the river hunting, we were down by the river getting those fish out of the stream. And, and so, with the change in diet, I think there's also a concern because now, people don't have access to their traditional foods. They're forced to go buy processed chicken or processed beef, and those are their main choices. They can't really choose, oh, I need some fish in my diet. Well, I mean, unless, of course, you're knowledgeable about that kind of thing, and when I heard, you know, about the omega-3s and the omega-6s and how there has to be a ratio, a balanced ratio in order for a person to experience optimum mental health, I was kind of like, wow, that's something I never even really knew about. And uh, I started eating tuna like crazy. And I don't know if it helped, but it didn't hurt anything. It certainly didn't hurt anything. So I believe that they need to find more natural remedies um, for these kinds of sicknesses instead of just like handing people over to the drug companies and making them slaves of the drug companies their whole lives. That to me is a waste of a human life, frankly. But I have to say this. I mean, if you're able to find a medication or combination of medications that work for you, and they actually work, do yourself a favor and don't get off them. you know, Thank God I found something that works, but I think, they should have, instead of loading me up on Ativan, loading me up on Halo and whatever else they gave me, that made me catatonic for 3 weeks. They really should have, tried to balance me with melatonin, with, natural remedies like chamomile tea, maybe, things that help people sleep naturally, um, things like that they just, they always go to the worst the worst possible choice in the matter, which is a drug. And I just don't see that as being holistic or healthy at all. Your first choice should not be a drug. Your first choice, honestly, your first choice when doctoring an illness should either come from the spiritual side through prayer, or it should come from the plant kingdom, or the animal kingdom, depending on what your symptomology is, and depending on what they can do to treat it effectively. And there are effective treatments for mental illness that are not considered drugs. And they don't tell you about that in med school. They don't tell patients about that, for Pete's sake. You know? But the other thing I have to say about my hospital experience is that they never bothered to try to treat the trauma that I was going through. They never said, oh my god, this person comes from a bajillion failed family systems and doesn't really have any relatives that can take care of him. In fact, I believe that they used that fact to victimize me even further. They used the fact that I had no one advocating for me to victimize me even further, to embroil me in the system even further, and to go further in the process of taking away my rights as a human being. You know, I was committed. I was literally committed under the civil commitment process from May of the year that I went crazy, May of 2009. I was committed until December 18th of 2009. So it was about July, August, September, October, November, December. So it was about a 7-month commitment. And let me tell you, even when I was in group residential housing, they still did not go about addressing anybody's trauma. They did not go about addressing anybody's, the cause of anybody's illness. They went around treating the symptoms, and that is something that is endemic in the medical establishment in the United States. They treat the symptoms, but they don't treat the illness. They treat the symptoms because it's easier to treat the symptoms and say, look, oh, you're better, and charge you more money, because you're basically then a slave to whatever combination of drugs or therapies that they have you on, and they can charge your insurance more money for that. I mean, I know what I'm on, and I've looked at the prices, and I absolutely die of sticker shock when I see how much my medical insurance has to pay for the drugs that I'm on. And it's like, why can't you just pay for some melatonin, some St. John's wort, and some fish oil and call it a day? Like, what would be wrong with that theory? Like, what would be wrong with taking that tack? I don't see anything wrong with it, you know what I mean? So, it just sort of, the way that they do the medication pandering and the medication pushing just rubs me the wrong way completely. So, and they never address the trauma that actually causes these illnesses. Never. I mean, if they did, they'd be talking about rape. They'd be talking about childhood abuse. They'd be talking about mental, emotional, physical abuse that happens to children. Um, they'd be talking about a lot of these things. And what's coming out, the funny thing is what's coming out in Europe, where they have support networks for people who hear voices, where they have support networks where it's okay to talk about these things. What's coming out is that a lot of these experiences, a lot of these illnesses, and their symptoms are caused by trauma. And honestly, I think if it weren't for the alcohol in our community, I think a lot more Indian people would be where I am, and they would have just lost their fucking minds. That's my honest opinion. So, I mean, I didn't go for the alcohol, therefore I lost my fucking mind, you know? Um, it was either lose my mind completely all in one go, or lose my mind slowly over a period of years after drinking myself silly. You know, that those were kind of my two options, and I basically always chose not to use the alcohol. Not to use the alcohol, so I don't know. Take from this what you will. But I think there's a lot of education that needs to be happening. I think there's a lot of understanding that needs to happen. Um, and we gotta understand that sometimes it would be beneficial to engage the content of delusions, to engage, you know, I mean, one of my delusions was that I needed to shut down the internet. Well, the doctor never asked me why I needed to shut down the internet. They just, you know, said I was delusional. Here, take your pills. You know, they never asked me, well, why do you think the internet needs to be shut down? Well, I'm addicted to it. Or, you know, I'm online all the time and not socially connecting. I'm isolated because of the internet. You know? They never asked me those things. And granted, I don't think when I was crazy I could have answered them in an honest way. But they could have still tried to engage where I was at and to get to the source of my traumas and to try to heal them, and they never even started on that process. All of these things, I mean, even talk therapy doesn't go there. All of these things I've had to find out on my own. And it's been eye-opening but very lonely. So with that, I will leave you, and have a good night. Mitakiwas.